Well, thanks so much, Alex, for being here today. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
So I want to start out by having you tell us a little bit about who you are and your role at San Joaquin Delta College. But first, just to give a little bit of an introduction to our listeners, you have just celebrated something pretty massive, and it's not commencement, but it's a passage of almost a $600 bond measure. So tell us about your role and who you are, but also tell us what really was at stake with this bond measure and why your role was so important in getting it on the ballot and ultimately passed.
Hey, you just said it was a $600 bond measure.
Oh no, 600 million. $600. That'd be like my kid's bond. Like if my child went,
That wouldn't buy very much.
I know it'd be like what two reams of photocopy paper. Okay, I stand correct. $600 million bond initiative. So yeah, tell us about yourself and tell us the role that you played in the initiative.
Well, so I'm the director of marketing and communications at Delta. I've been here for about 7 years. I actually come from a journalism background. I spent around 2 decades as a journalist. In fact, the sort of the funny part of this story is that one of my assignments as a community journalist here in Stockton was to cover Delta College. And in fact, I covered the previous bond measure that we had 50 years ago. So I actually thought that was helpful coming into this process because I had some context sort of for what we'd done in the past and what worked well and what didn't work well, those sorts of things, particularly when it came to sort of community sentiment on this subject, how folks felt about the last bond, how they felt about prospective additional bond here. So I sort of felt having that background as a journalist was helpful in that way because I just sort of had some of that background information, some of that context that I could bring to the table. So, you know, we always knew that we would need to go out for another bond at some point. It had been 20 years, so it had been quite a bit of time. In fact, our main campus here in Stockton has been in existence for half a century. And up until this time, we had only gone out for one bond. So we really had some pretty critical infrastructure and facilities needs. So we knew this was going to come. And of course, as the marketing guy, I'm thinking, okay, this is gonna involve me in a pretty big way. And I'd heard stories about sort of how challenging this was from folks at other colleges. And I was approaching it honestly with a little bit of trepidation because I just wasn't sure what all it would entail for me and how this is, a lot of this sort of the campaign work is separate from the college, right? So I'm thinking, boy, how much is this going to sort of add to my regular everyday workload, right? So those were some of the concerns that I sort of had going in, but I would say on the whole, it was a very positive experience. Actually had a lot of fun. It was an opportunity for me to go out into the community and talk about this place and just knock on some doors and burn some shoe leather in our neighborhoods, talking to people about the college. And for me, that's a lot of fun. Just getting out into neighborhoods, talking to folks about Delta College and the great work that we're doing. So looking back, it was a stressful time and it was a lot, but I also really, really enjoyed it.
Now we have listeners from all over the nation, and some states call bonds levies, and here in California we call it a bond. So before we get into like the deep dive onto how to get this thing passed, can you share just maybe a little bit about like how a bond works, what you can use it for, what you can't use it for here in California? Because I think that's a little bit different than it might be in Texas or Illinois. So what the threshold is that you have to get it past, those type of things.
So the threshold is 55%. So it's not just a majority vote. You need just a little extra on top of that to get it through. And I think in terms of what it can be used for, and this is what's really essential when it comes to messaging, right, is that it's used for facilities to benefit our students. not used for administrative salaries. I mean, that's really, really important because people, understandably so, are skeptical about taxes and how they're used. And, we pay taxes and they go into this black hole and we never really know what comes out of that, right? So I think it was really, really, really important for us to be clear with the public about what this money can be used for and what it cannot be used for. So we were very, very clear about no money being used for administrative salaries. And we also talked, frankly, a lot about oversight. We're required by law to have a citizens oversight committee to monitor how bond money is being spent. So there's some oversight, which is really important. So we talked about that as well. We talked about some of the protections that are in place to make sure that that tax money is being spent appropriately. So it's certainly more complicated than that, and I'm not an expert, even though I've gone through this process. But that's the key thing to talk about. It's for facilities improvements. It's not for salaries.
No, and I think that is really important because the state of California, at least, doesn't give enough money for schools to be able to update their facilities. Like, the money is used to pay salaries, maybe to buy equipment. But if you want to build a new nursing facility or you want to build a veterans center, like, you're probably going to have to go to your community and ask them to support it through their own increase in taxes. I mean, you're asking community members to raise taxes on themselves to pay for the things that your college needs. So
yeah, and we have, there are times when we've received state matching funds, for example, for bond projects, but
right.
But you're right. I mean, this is one of the few levers that we have to pull to really raise significant money. I mean, it's expensive to build anything these days. So this is really one of the few levers we have to pull, asking the community to consider investing in us. And that's a tough ask. And it's really sort of I sort of viewed it as really a sort of a solemn endeavor to go out and ask folks to consider taxing themselves. And which of course is why, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but is why we talk so much about what we can do for the community and sort of what their return on investment is for putting in hard-earned taxpayer dollars into supporting us.
And I think that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about next, which, and you've already mentioned, which is the importance of polling. So you've got like a long list of things. So I went through bond, for those of you listening, I went through bond measure twice at the college I worked at, and we failed the first time, learned a lot. It was probably the biggest professional failure of my career. It was like gut wrenching. For those of you that have been through a bond campaign, it is so much time and passion and energy, and you're not allowed to do it during work, right? Because you're campaigning. So it's like the weekends and the nights, and we had 6 a.m. coffee meetings, and then we lost. And Stockton's in a conservative area of California, right? Like, you're predominantly conservative. So there's a little bit more of an uphill battle. Like, you really need to show conservatives who value fiscal responsibility and lower taxes. You've got to show them that they can trust you and what you're spending the money on, right? So, and we're in a conservative area in San Diego as well.
Yeah, we're sort of purple.
Okay.
We have longstanding the agriculture community here is a significant part of our heritage, but we also have a lot of folks, sort of an influx of folks from the Bay Area, we're almost an extension of the Bay Area at this point, San Francisco Bay Area. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic politically. We actually flipped red at the top of the ticket this November for the first time in something like 20 years. And given the skepticism that conservatives tend to have about taxes, honestly, I was surprised. I mean, I didn't know. If you told me that we were going to go red at the top of the ticket, I would have thought that would have portended poorly for us.
Yeah.
But that's why it was so important to talk about things that resonate with everyone across. I don't care where you are on the political spectrum, right? We do things at this college to benefit and uplift the entire community, politics irrespective. And it was really important for us to drive that home.
And I think that's the beauty of the polling. So I'd love you to talk more about how that worked. And just before you dive into it, I like the polling to me was a marketer's dream because our polling, and I don't know if yours is similar, but it tested like every single statement and would like read a statement and say, now that you know that we're spending the funds on redoing the Veterans Center, how likely are you to support the bond? And I know that we learned we had a bond or a board member who wanted a sand volleyball court. Like this guy was gonna like die on his sand volleyball court. It pulled terrible. Like our bond consultants were like, whatever you do, do not let George mention the sand volleyball court in public. People will vote against the bond because they think it's a waste of money. And so it really helped us with messaging. It was great. I loved being able to be like, George, I can't talk about the sand volleyball court because nobody's going to vote for the bond if I do. So,
Yeah, the poll gave you justification
yeah.
for that. And that's really important. I viewed the poll, we did multiple polls, but I viewed the polling as really being our North Star. We had a great consultant who really forced us to stay on message. And it was every decision we made really was based on the polling. You know, the polling, not only did it give us insight on specific statements that could help us frame the language, but it also gave us a lot of info on just, you know, how many folks are already a yes, how many folks are a no, and how many folks are undecided, and who are those folks? Because our thinking was, what can we do to reach the undecideds, and try to move the needle just a little bit on those folks. So the polling was essential. I really tried to just immerse myself in the polling and again make like every decision we were making, not just the bond campaign itself, which of course was completely external from the college and has nothing to do with college resources or college personnel. That's an external effort. But the decisions that we were making in the marketing office about how to do our day-to-day work, our brand awareness work, our enrollment marketing, things like that, we were always looking at that stuff through the lens of what the polling showed us with regard to the bond, because we thought that would help us in sort of doing some dual purpose work that can, you know, obviously facilitating enrollment growth while also facilitating increased community understanding of what we do for a bond measure. So the polling, I mean, I lived and breathed the polling for the duration of this effort.
Was there any instance where some of the information you got from the poll helped you with enrollment marketing? Were you able to use any of that to help with your day-to-day work?
Sure. Well, I mean, it helped us to identify specific programs that pulled well in the community. And so one of the things we tried to do is we looked at which of those programs had the capacity for growth. We didn't want to just throw money at programs simply because they pulled well, but this is supposed to be dual purpose marketing that we were doing, right? So of those programs that pulled well, which have the capacity for growth, and then we put money into digital ads and mailers promoting those programs. We have a college app subscription. College app gives us data on around 70 to 80% of the adults in our district. And so we use that tool to build custom audiences for these campaigns that were, these are folks who had a high likelihood of enrolling. And that was the most important thing. But secondarily, trying to work in some of what we saw in the polling in terms of which audiences we wanted to reach, who those undecideds were. I think some of our work, for example, we targeted homeowners, which is not something that we might ordinarily do, right? But we knew that homeowners, because they're the ones paying the taxes, were more likely to be skeptical about a bond. So we targeted homeowners who had a high likelihood of enrolling at one point. So it was a way to sort of mesh together those two goals as best we could. I don't know how effective all that ended up being, but we knew there would be a massive bond campaign, again, external to college, but we want to do whatever we could internally with our own resources in-house to at least help facilitate support for the bond while obviously working to increase enrollment at the same time.
That's great. Anytime you can use, data-driven decision-making to help with marketing, even if you don't know the outcomes, and at least you're making informed, educated decisions. And that's really a creative way to approach it and to use this. I mean, it's a great resource. So.
Yeah, we felt that it was going to be very close. And my view was even moving the needle just a hair on the undecided population could be the difference between passing and not passing. And the consequence, you talked about this a little bit, the consequence of not passing a bond after you go out into the community and talk about it and your campaign committee raises funds, the consequence of not passing a bond is that you've already put so much effort into it, you've raised money for it, and then it failed. You can't just turn around and do it again the next day.
Right.
So I think you have to be pretty confident that you can get there, again, based on the polling. And then you've got to just do whatever you can to move the needle even just a little bit to get up above that 55% threshold. We ended up passing at close to 60% across the district, which I think we were just over the moon. We were over the moon excited about that, considering, again, sort of some of the headwinds we faced, which I haven't really talked about yet, but the uncertainty, what was going on with the presidential race, and all of that. The fact that we passed with that kind of margin, to me was remarkable. And I'll just put a quick plug in here to just really thank the voters in the district for seeing and recognizing what we do. We view it as being, a real validation of the work that we do here. And I just really want to thank folks. It's never an easy ask. And we're just honored and extremely pleased that so many people see the value of Delta College, that they're willing to put this kind of investment into what we do.
Well, I want to talk to you more about the role marketing plays, both like during work hours and what you're allowed to do, and then after, and how important it is for you as the marketing leader on your campus to have a seat at the table and a leadership seat. But first, let's hear something from our sponsor.
How do higher education decision makers find the right solution when technology evolves at light speed? Well, we usually start with our network. EdTech Connect is the network that's democratizing the higher ed technology conversation. EdTech Connect is free, so anyone with a .edu email address can sign up and list the software and services they use in their role at their school. Once you're in, you can find out what solutions similar schools are doing all over the country. Whether you're looking to find the hot new AI tool, or maybe learn options you have to upgrade your campus search engine, or even get to your short list of marketing solution vendors, EdTech Connect is the place to go. So visit edtechconnect.com and set up your free profile to get a pulse for what's happening with higher ed technology today.
All right, so before we took that break, we were listening, or we were talking about just how you just shot over your projections, which is so cool. 55% is what you needed to pass, and you went to 60%. And I know you had said earlier that you didn't know how successful your marketing was, but I think clearly it was successful, because what else is going to make somebody change their mind other than more information and better information? So tell me a little bit about what are the rules around what you can do to inform the community about the bond and what you can't do. And then also let's talk about what you did after hours, not as the marketing director, but just as Alex, and what your role was to help support the bond, as a citizen.
Well, we looked at it, we really had two sort of mechanisms. One was the public information side of things, which is simply putting out the facts. This is what we're proposing. This is what it would cost. These are the sorts of things the money could be used for. That's not campaigning. That's just public information. So certainly I, as the PIO, we were putting out press releases every time, when the board approved moving forward, and at various critical points along the way, we would put out public information. without advocating for the bond. That's the key difference, right? In fact, we did do one district-wide mailer shortly after the board decided to move forward. That was a public information mailer. It was not an advocacy piece. And it simply said, this is what we're doing. Here are the facts. Here's what it's going to cost you. Full disclosure, right? That's public information. So we did a lot of that during business hours out of the marketing office, because that was fair game. After hours, of course, was a completely different story. So we had a campaign committee, and I was a member of that committee. We met after hours. You can't use your institutional email. You can't use any institutional resources whatsoever. So we were all using our personal email addresses to communicate. The committee members, we were meeting after hours. And what really got fun, I thought the campaign stuff was a blast as a campaign volunteer. We got to go out and do some door knocking, some canvassing. We did some text banking, which was a lot of fun and very, very interesting. And again, just getting to go out and talk to folks in the community, I thought was a lot of fun. I mean, obviously we run campaigns and we put out messaging externally, but rarely, I think as marketers, rarely do we sort of get outside of our bubble on campus and actually just go out and talk face to face with people about how great our colleges are. And it was very refreshing to have the chance to go out and do that. It was demanding on our time because obviously it was all after hours on our own time. Saturdays, weeknights, and there were a lot of logistical challenges. So for example, we put out a series of mailers through the campaign funded by campaign donations, and we needed creatives for those mailers. And it's like, okay, how do we do that? We can't, I can't organize this like I would a normal photo shoot on our campus. I can't use email to reach out to faculty and gauge availability to go into classrooms or lab space. I can't do anything during work hours to facilitate any of that kind of work. So I would take breaks during the day when I was not working, and I would go out and I would very clearly identify myself as a committee volunteer, not as an employee, and talk to folks and try to make arrangements to do photo shoots. I actually took a day off to facilitate a photo shoot on my own campus, which was a bit surreal. the sort of thing that I do every day, but I had to take a day off to do it, which I was happy to do, but a little bit surreal. And actually, we found out later that we couldn't use those materials because they were shot in an instructional space during class time, which was a restriction that I was not aware of at the time. So lesson learned. So ultimately, we had to use a lot of stock art for these campaigns. I mean, and I hate doing that. I know we all hate using stock art for anything, but we sort of had to for the campaign materials. It was just too difficult to pull together something that could be done properly and legally.
Right.
It was
And
just too hard.
fast. I mean, you're also working, I think one thing that we haven't touched on so much is how quickly all of this happened, right? I'm assuming, did you make a decision to go out in the fall or in the spring, and then it was on the fall ballot? So
Yeah, the board vote, I think, was in July.
July, so summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we were on the ballot in November. And I'll tell you, the campaign stuff really I'm sure every campaign is different. This is the only one I've been through. But the campaign, in terms of churning out mailers and stuff, that really didn't accelerate until late September, early October. So, and after that, it was boom, 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 go, go, go.
Right.
And approvals on some of these materials, it wasn't days, it was a matter of hours. At times.
And that's when the polling stuff, and also I want to say that's when your expertise is so important, because I remember doing this and having approvals with our board president, our vice presidents, the foundation board. It's just like a table of all these people that want to fight over every word, and you got to make a decision. And that's when the polling came in. And I think you and I had even talked about, was it clean water? There was some message that like you had to be like, hey, we don't, this is clearly something we want to stay away from. So having that expertise is really important.
Yeah, I mean, the polling, you know, we talked about how important it is to abide by the polling and be vigilant in sticking with the messaging. However, that doesn't mean that all of the messaging that comes out of the polling is appropriate
Right.
for our community, right? Like if you don't have a problem, like maybe your college doesn't have a problem with leaky roofs, right? This is a hypothetical. You don't have a problem with leaky roofs, but you put out campaign materials talking about how the bond will fix leaky roofs. The community may not pick up on that, but internally, your college will, and that can raise credibility issues and can cause all sorts of problems. So it's important to be, as important as the polling is, it's
Right.
also important to be honest about what our real problems are. And just because something polls well doesn't mean that we should necessarily be talking about it.
Right. I know. I remember with ours, some of it was embarrassing too. It was like they had asked us, I had to go to the campus on a Saturday and take pictures of like leaky roofs and like anything broken. They're like, pretty much go find the worst things you can on campus and take pictures of them. And then here I am, the marketing director, being like, please don't put this out. Like nobody is going to enroll when they see these pictures. Because our campus, we hadn't ever passed one, ever in the history of the campus. And it was 70 years old. And there was a lot of broken stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing. But
Well, you know, what we saw in the polling was that what really resonated with folks were the deteriorating facilities.
yeah,
It was not the bright, shiny objects. And the temptation, I think, for a lot of folks, I'm speaking generally here, the temptation for a lot of folks is to talk about the bright, shiny objects, right? The sparkling new buildings, the stuff that gets people excited. But in reality, again, the polling indicated that was not the best way to approach this. And that's where, again, it became very, very important to stick with what the polling showed. And that's what we did. That's what our consultant was very good at keeping us in line on that. And I think that's, speaking of the role of marketing, I think that's what we do, right? We figure out what our messaging is and we stick to it. And I think one of our key roles is to convince everyone else to do the same and try to keep everyone sort of focused on what the polling shows and what's going to be the most effective.
for sure. Yeah, I know. I had to get over it because of the poll too. I mean, ours showed the same thing. I talked about the sand volleyball court. I mean, people wanted to be like, we're going to be earthquake compliant. We're going to be ADA compliant. Our campus wasn't it wasn't ADA compliant, half the campus. And I think if you think about your own house, if you're a homeowner, you're going to want to fix the things that are broken. If you've got a leaky faucet and nobody can get in through your front door, you're not going to want to spend 150 grand on a pool. Like you want to, so it's the same thing. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left in the conversation, but I really wanted to touch on two things. First, what you're doing now that the bond's passed. Like the hard work's over, but the work's not over. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. And then also, if you have any advice especially for marketing or public information officers who've never done this before, what advice do you give them?
Yeah, well, we're still in the initial phases, obviously, of implementing. It's really just passed recently. Our board of trustees has identified priority projects to start focusing on. So we're prepared to roll out a campaign demonstrating progress being made on those projects. That's really important. I mean, I think one of the mistakes we made maybe 20 years ago was we didn't talk enough about the great things that we were doing with that bond money at the time.
Right.
So lesson learned from that. We've also just been putting out when we have the opportunity, putting out some general, just thank you to the community. Thank you for supporting us ads. While that recollection is still fresh in their minds about the bond measure, we don't want too much time to pass without expressing our gratitude to the community. So it's going to be a lot of work over many years, really, to demonstrate that we're using taxpayer money appropriately and that we're benefiting students. Again, lesson learned from the last bond where we probably weren't as effective as we could have been in that regard. So yeah, in some ways there's more work ahead of us than there is behind us, but it was very exciting to get the actual campaign out of the way. What I would suggest, I suppose, to folks who haven't been through this before is really to to plan early, make sure that discussions are happening, that groundwork is being laid, meetings are being held with local officials, elected officials, community leaders, to sort of put in the groundwork. I would say anything that you can do on the marketing side to promote your CTE programs is really important. CTE pulled very well, and I would imagine that would be the same for most colleges. But you know, you're an older, retired property owner. You may not be planning to enroll here. You may not have family members who are, but you want to know that there's going to be a nurse who is trained to help you when you need medical attention, right? That's a very important. So we put a lot of healthcare messaging out there during the bond. I mean, everyone wants to hear that sort of reassurance. So laying the groundwork early on the marketing side and talking about that stuff, talking about CT, talking about the students that we're putting directly into high-paying jobs in our community, because I think that's something people think of us as being transfer institutions. Talking about CTE, I think, is really, really important. And then I guess I would just say, embrace the opportunity. Be visible. This is a great opportunity to show how important marketing is for a community college. And there's not much more important than helping to secure hundreds of millions of dollars for facilities improvements that are going to benefit students for generations to come. So make yourself visible. Go, you know, if there's an organized campaign, go to those events, knock on those doors, talk to people, because ultimately, if the campaign is successful, this is something you can go back and you can say, I mean, obviously it's a college-wide effort, but marketing should take some credit for a successful bond campaign. And that's really important in building up your own credibility and your own political capital, I suppose, on your campus. So make yourself visible. It's a great opportunity to demonstrate your value to your board of trustees, to your executive team, and to everyone else on campus. So don't be afraid to dive in. I think, you know, again, I said this at the beginning, it was a lot more fun than I expected it to be. So embrace it and have fun and dive in. It's a short term, unlike many of the things we do, the election will happen on a certain day and then it's over. This is not going to be an ongoing thing that you're going to have to deal with for years and years, right? It's a short-term campaign. It will end. It's hard, but it will end. Dive in and give it everything you got, because if you lose by a few hundred votes, you're going to regret things that maybe you think you should have done, right? So give it your all. Don't leave anything on the sideline. Do everything you can, and enjoy the opportunity.
Great, such great advice. And Alex, thank you so much, and congratulations to you and your college.
Thank you so much.
I'm excited to see what's to come.
So
I know you're gonna have to invite me up to campus at some point.
There you go. There you go. You're welcome anytime.
Well, I really appreciate your time and your expertise. And for those of you wanting to connect with Alex, find him on LinkedIn or go to San Joaquin Delta. He spoke at a conference on this. So I know that you're out there as a resource to other marketing directors. So
Absolutely.
appreciate you so much.
All right. Thank you.